She refused to cook, so they tried to sell her, the rancher said. She deserves freedom. The dust swirled lazily around Eleanor's worn boots as she stood defiantly in the middle of Main Street, her hands planted firmly on her hips. The entire town of Copper Ridge had gathered to witness what would become the most talked-about moment in their quiet frontier settlement. Behind her, the auctioneer's platform waited ominously, while ahead of her stood Marcus Whitfield, the man whose simple act of defiance would change everything she thought she knew about freedom, dignity, and the power of standing up for what's right. But let's start from the beginning. 3 days earlier, when this extraordinary tale first began to unfold. Chapter 1. The refusal. The morning sun painted the kitchen of the Copper Ridge boarding house in warm golden hues. Steam rose from the Castian stove, carrying the familiar scents of coffee and frying bacon that had greeted Eleanor Hartwell every dawn for the past 2 years. She moved with practiced efficiency, her calloused hands working automatically as her mind wandered to thoughts of the world beyond these walls. Eleanor had never planned to spend her life cooking for strangers. She possessed a sharp mind and dreams that stretched far beyond the confines of Jeremiah Blackwood's establishment. She had come to Copper Ridge with hopes of teaching school, but the town already had a schoolmaster, and a woman with no family and dwindling savings had few choices in 1887. Eleanor. Blackwood's voice boomed from the dining room, sharp with impatience. Where are those biscuits? The men are waiting. She glanced at the empty flour barrel beside the stove, then at the meager coins in the tin box on the shelf, barely enough to feed herself, let alone purchase supplies for another day of cooking. For months, she had watched Blackwood collect payment from his boarders while providing her with nothing more than a cramped room and scraps from the kitchen. The promise of wages had evaporated like morning mist, replaced with excuses about hard times and delayed payments. The flour's gone, Eleanor called back, her voice steady despite the trembling in her chest. Heavy footsteps approached the kitchen. Blackwood appeared in the doorway, his face red with irritation. He was a large man, thick around the middle, with small eyes that seemed to calculate the worth of everything they fell upon. Then go buy more, he said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. Eleanor turned to face him fully, wiping her hands on her apron with deliberate slowness. With what money, Mr. Blackwood? His expression darkened. Don't take that tone with me, girl. I've given you a roof over your head, and I've given you 2 years of labor without pay. Eleanor interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. I won't cook another meal until you pay me what you owe. The silence that followed seemed to stretch like a taut rope between them. Blackwood's face cycled through several shades of red before settling on a deep crimson that matched his. Fury, you'll do as you're told, or you'll find yourself without even that roof, he snarled. Eleanor lifted her chin, meeting his glare with quiet determination. Then I suppose I'll be looking for a new roof. I won't cook today, Mr. Blackwood. Not without payment. Chapter 2. The consequence. Word of Eleanor's rebellion spread through Copper Ridge faster than wildfire in dry grass. By noon, it seemed every soul in town had heard about the woman who dared to defy Jeremiah Blackwood. Some whispered their admiration in shadowed corners, while others clucked their tongues at such unseemly behavior. Eleanor spent the afternoon in her small room, listening to the commotion below as Blackwood struggled to prepare meals himself. The sounds of clattering pots and muttered curses drifted through the thin walls, along with complaints from hungry boarders. As evening approached, 3 sharp knocks echoed through her door. Open up, Eleanor. We need to talk. Blackwood's voice had taken on a different quality, more calculating. She opened the door to find him standing with Sheriff Morton and another man she didn't recognize, tall and thin with nervous eyes. Pack your things, Blackwood said without preamble. Since you won't fulfill your obligations here, I'm selling your contract to settle your debts. Eleanor's blood chilled. I have no contract with you. I'm not property to be sold. You owe me for room and board, Blackwood replied smoothly. 2 years' worth. Mr. Clemens here is willing to take on that debt in exchange for your services at his establishment. She looked at the thin man, noting the way his eyes avoided hers, and understood immediately what kind of establishment he meant. Her stomach lurched, but she kept her voice level. I owe you nothing, Mr. Blackwood. You owe me wages for 2 years of work. Sheriff Morton shifted uncomfortably. Now, Miss Hartwell, let's be reasonable. Eleanor's composure cracked slightly. Is it reasonable to sell a woman because she asked for honest payment for honest work? The sheriff's face reddened, but before he could respond, another voice cut through the tension. Actually, Sheriff, I believe Miss Hartwell is in the right. All 4 people turned toward the stairs, where a man was ascending with measured steps. Eleanor recognized him immediately. Marcus Whitfield, owner of the largest ranch in the territory. She had seen him in town before, always polite to shopkeepers, always fair in his dealings. He was perhaps 35 with kind eyes and prematurely silver hair that caught the lamplight. "Mr. Whitfield," Sheriff Morton said, his tone suddenly respectful. "This is a private matter." "Nothing's private when it happens in the middle of town," Marcus replied calmly, reaching the top of the stairs. His presence seemed to fill the narrow hallway. "I couldn't help but overhear. Miss Hartwell, is it true you've been working here for 2 years without wages?" Eleanor found her voice. "Yes, sir. Mr. Blackwood promised payment, but lies." Blackwood sputtered. "She's had room and board. Room and board in exchange for labor is employment, not charity," Marcus said quietly. "And employment requires payment." He turned his attention to Clemens. "As for you, sir, I suggest you reconsider whatever arrangement you thought you were making here." The thin man wilted under Marcus's steady gaze. Perhaps I was mistaken about the situation," he mumbled, and quickly departed. Chapter 3. An unexpected proposition. The confrontation in the hallway dispersed like smoke, leaving Eleanor alone with her racing thoughts. She had expected to be dragged from the boarding house in chains, but Marcus Whitfield's intervention had changed everything. Still, her situation remained precarious. She had nowhere to go, and no means to support herself. The next morning brought another surprise. As she sat in the town's small cafe, nursing a cup of coffee she could barely afford, Marcus Whitfield approached her table. "Miss Hartwell, might I join you?" She nodded, curious about his intentions. He settled into the chair across from her with an easy grace, removing his hat and placing it on the table between them. "I have a proposition," he said without preamble. "My ranch house is in need of a housekeeper. The position comes with fair wages, comfortable quarters, and the respect due any honest worker." Eleanor studied his face, searching for hidden motives. "Why would you help me?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "My sister was in a similar situation once," he said finally, "in Denver, working for a family who took advantage of her desperation. By the time I learned of it and could help her, she had lost hope. She died the following winter, alone and broken." The pain in his voice was unmistakable, and Eleanor felt her defenses soften. "I'm sorry for your loss. She was brave, like you," he continued. "She stood up for herself, refused to be treated poorly, but she had no one to stand with her." He met Eleanor's eyes directly. "I'd like to ensure you don't face the same fate." Eleanor considered his offer carefully. It seemed too good to be true, yet his manner suggested genuine sincerity. "What would my duties be?" "Managing the household, overseeing meals for myself and my ranch hands, maintaining the main house. Nothing more, nothing less. You'd have Sundays free and a private room in the main house, and wages, $30 a month, plus room and board." Eleanor's breath caught. It was more than most women could earn in the territory, more than enough to eventually save for her own future. But still, she hesitated. Marcus seemed to sense her uncertainty. "Miss Hartwell, you've already proven you won't be taken advantage of. I respect that. I need someone I can trust to run my household properly, and you need honest employment. It seems like an arrangement that could benefit us both." Chapter 4. The town's judgment. By the time Eleanor made her decision and moved to the Whitfield Ranch, Copper Ridge was buzzing with gossip. The general consensus seemed to be that she had gotten above her station, that a woman in her position should be grateful for whatever work she could find. 3 weeks into her new position, Eleanor found herself happier than she had been in years. The ranch house was spacious and well appointed, her room was comfortable, and Marcus proved to be a fair and respectful employer. He treated her as a valued member of his household staff, seeking her opinion on household matters and never speaking to her with anything less than courtesy. The ranch hands, initially skeptical of the woman who had caused such a stir in town, soon warmed to her efficient management and excellent cooking. She found purpose in her work and began to feel something she hadn't experienced in a long time. But Copper Ridge was not ready to let the matter rest. One afternoon, as Eleanor was returning from the general store with supplies, she encountered a group of women from town gathered outside the church. Their conversation stopped abruptly when they saw her, replaced by meaningful looks and barely concealed whispers. Mrs. Adelaide Hutchins, the banker's wife and self-appointed moral guardian of Copper Ridge, stepped forward with a cold smile. "Miss Hartwell," she said in a tone that could freeze water in July, "how nice to see you. We were just discussing your situation." Eleanor kept her expression neutral. "My situation, Mrs. Hutchins, living alone with Mr. Whitfield, of course. People are talking, as you might imagine." The other women nodded in agreement, their faces reflecting various degrees of disapproval and false concern. Mr. Whitfield employs several ranch hands who live on the property, Eleanor replied evenly. I'm hardly alone with him still, Mrs. Hutchins persisted. It's most irregular. A decent woman would be more concerned about appearances. Eleanor felt her familiar spark of defiance kindle in her chest. A decent woman would be more concerned about honest work and fair treatment than the idle gossip of people with too much time on their hands. The gasps that followed, her words seemed to echo off the church walls. Mrs. Hutchins's face turned the color of a summer sunset. Well, I never. Perhaps you should, Eleanor said quietly, then continued on her way, leaving the women to their whispers. Chapter 5. The stand word of Eleanor's latest defiance reached Marcus before she returned to the ranch. She found him waiting on the front porch, his expression unreadable. I hear you've been making more enemies in town, he said as she approached. Eleanor set down her packages and smoothed her skirts. I seem to have a talent for it. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then surprised her by chuckling. Adelaide Hutchins has needed someone to speak plainly to her for years. I'm rather impressed you're not concerned about your reputation. My reputation can withstand association with an honest, hard-working woman, he replied firmly. The question is whether you can withstand the pressure they're likely to bring to bear, as if in answer to his words. Sheriff Morton appeared at the end of the long drive leading to the ranch house. He rode slowly, reluctantly, and Eleanor knew instinctively that his visit would not be pleasant. Miss Hartwell, the sheriff said as he dismounted. Mr. Whitfield, I'm afraid I have some concerns that have been brought to my attention. Marcus stepped forward slightly, a subtle but clear protective gesture. What kind of concerns, Sheriff? Well, there's been talk about Miss Hartwell's living arrangements here. Some folks think it's not proper. Some folks need to mind their own business, Marcus said, his voice taking on a harder edge. Now, Marcus, you know I agree with you, but I have to consider the peace of the community. Maybe Miss Hartwell could find lodgings in town, continue to work here during the day. Double quotes. Eleanor felt something inside her snap. She had been pushed and prodded, judged and whispered about, treated as if her choices were somehow subject to the approval of strangers. Enough was enough. No, she said firmly. Both men looked at her in surprise. I said no, Sheriff Morton. I have honest employment, comfortable lodgings, and fair treatment. I will not be driven from my home by busybodies and gossips. Miss Hartwell, please be reasonable. I am being reasonable, Eleanor interrupted. What's unreasonable is expecting me to make my life less comfortable to satisfy people who have no claim on my decisions. Marcus stepped up beside her. Sheriff, Miss Hartwell is a valued employee. Her living arrangements are appropriate and will not be changing to appease small-minded gossip. Sheriff Morton looked between them, clearly uncomfortable with the situation but equally clearly outmatched. Well, I suppose if you're both certain. We are, Marcus said firmly. Chapter 6. Freedom's true meaning. That evening, Eleanor and Marcus sat on the front porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The confrontation with the sheriff had left Eleanor feeling both drained and oddly liberated. Thank you, she said quietly, for standing with me. Marcus was silent for a long moment, watching the last light fade from the western horizon. You know, when I offered you this position, I thought I was rescuing you. Eleanor glanced at him curiously. And now I think perhaps you've rescued yourself. All I did was provide the opportunity. She considered his words, thinking about the journey that had brought her to this point. From the scared woman who had refused to cook without wages to someone who could face down the moral arbiters of Copper Ridge, she had indeed changed. My sister never had the chance to fight for herself the way you have, Marcus continued. She was worn down, broken by people who saw her as less than human. But you've never let them break you. Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes, not of sadness but of recognition. Freedom isn't something that's given, is it? It's something you take and defend, Marcus added. Every day, if necessary. They sat in comfortable silence as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Eleanor realized that for the first time in her adult life, she felt truly free, not because someone had granted her freedom, but because she had claimed it for herself. Epilogue. A new dawn. 6 months later, Eleanor stood once again in the middle of Copper Ridge's main street. But this time, she was not alone. Marcus stood beside her, and behind them gathered not just the ranch hands who had come to respect her, but several other women who had found courage in her example. Mrs. Hutchins and her circle of moral guardians watched from the boardwalk with expressions of disapproval, but their power to intimidate had been broken. Eleanor had proven that a woman could stand up for herself and thrive. Are you ready? Marcus asked quietly. Eleanor looked at the building. They were about to enter the schoolhouse, where the town council had finally agreed to interview her for the teaching position that had always been her dream. Her success at the ranch had demonstrated her capabilities, and her stand against injustice had proven her character. "I've been ready for years," she said, then added with a smile, "I just needed to learn. I deserved the chance." As they walked toward the schoolhouse together, Eleanor reflected on the path that had brought her here. She had refused to cook without fair payment, had stood against those who would sell her dignity for their convenience, and had found in Marcus Whitfield not a rescuer, but an ally who understood that freedom was something every person deserved. The rancher had been right. She did deserve freedom, but more importantly, she had learned that freedom was hers to claim, defend, and share with others who needed the courage to stand up for themselves. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows that stretched behind them as they walked toward Eleanor's future, a future she had fought for and won through her own strength, courage, an unwavering belief that every person, regardless of gender or circumstance, deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. In the end, that was the most important lesson of all.